For RealAgriculture, I'm Kelvin Hepner. We're at the CropConnect Conference in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and pleased to be joined once again by a recent guest on RealAg, Bill Wirtz. Bill is a senior policy analyst with the Consumer Choice Centre and an expert in all things EU, European ag policy. And Bill, when it comes to the Farm to Fork initiative that we heard a lot about 4 or 5 years ago when European lawmakers were moving ahead with it, since then there's been, of course, tractors in the streets. We've seen that on social media and on news reports here in North America. And lawmakers have pulled back a lot of those efforts that were part of that initial Farm to Fork initiative. That ambition isn't as strong anymore. What led to that turnaround? And I guess I'm asking because that could potentially be relevant in a Canadian or North American context.
What was really relevant was the amount of farmers out on the streets and the amount of time that they spent out on the streets. You can handle a few protests in a political sense. You can always handle a bit of backlash. The opposition says this, organizations push back against your policies. But if you have thousands of tractors, sometimes every weekend, sometimes every day of the week, out in the streets, megaphones out, calling out the policies and how it's going to increase food prices and make life difficult for farmers, that had a real impact. The amount of farmers out there, the amount of sympathies that those farmers gathered, really made an impact on all of these policies, to the extent that we went from an unveiling of the Farm to Fork strategy in 2020 to the new agriculture commissioner just 5 years later saying this project is dead. It is dead. It is dead in every single country. It has no support anymore. There's no political consensus that we should go anywhere near to those ideas. Which is a big topic. Like usually in Europe, it takes time to change policies. This one happened really quickly.
So is that due to farmers' effectiveness in their messaging, farm groups being effective in their presentation and making that argument to the public, or what led to that such a massive turnaround, almost unprecedented in many ways?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that go into it, right? Sometimes you have a local charismatic spokesperson. Sometimes it can just be the slogan. One of the slogan was like, no farmers, no food. And it just resonates because it's a simple slogan and it amplifies the message of we need farmers in order to have enjoy our lifestyle in the way we currently do. We need farmers. We want our local farmers. On the other hand, it's also the effectiveness of the messaging also narrows down to what is the current political trend. In Europe, a lot of the environmental rules over the last 10 years have made life more expensive. Everything from energy to just using your car has become quite expensive. So there was already a general frustration with the way things were going, and farmers were playing into that sentiment by expressing that, look, you're making life incredibly difficult for us. But it's not just that life is more expensive for us as consumers, we are also, as farmers, our business may not survive. And so people that already were struggling to deal with the regulation that is put on you day to day, on everything from just combustion charges to how much you have to spend on a car, and the fact that electric cars are supposed to be subsidized and you're supposed to switch it out, but it's still too expensive for you to have it. And then you hear someone on TV saying, look, my livelihood is at stake here. You relate to that person. And so the messaging was tailored to a political momentum, and that's why also its effectiveness increased.
What did the farmers have for support from the public in terms of the public being on and broader society being on side?
Yeah, so the polling varies between 70 and 90% of people not associated with the agricultural sector saying that they support the protest despite the disruptions. So that is significant. On top of that, farmers' parties, the Netherlands is a specific example where the farmer citizen movement, Boer-Burgerbeweging, which is the Dutch title BBB, now part of the government, part of the Senate, a significant part of the Senate in the Netherlands. They ran for office. Had a lot of success with that. Of course, if you run for office, you also need to figure out other things as well, because then as a political party, the questions are also asked, what is your position on migration and the education system? And while farmers may have the same view on the regulation of the farm sector, they have different political views on those other issues. So creating a political movement comes with other strings attached. It's difficult in the current arena to be single issue. So there's some problems associated with that, but even those usually did very well. And now every political party, says that, they're on the side of farmers, So I guess ultimately that's good news for farmers.
70 to 90%, I'm not sure. There are very few issues in Canada that would unite 70 to 90% of the voting public, I would say, in terms of things that we unite around.
Well, I mean, 70 to 90% of people would probably agree that we need to have farmers that stand on solid financial ground, right? And that was ultimately the messaging. We departed from this idea in Europe that farmers should be able to run their business the way that they see fit and run their farm the way they see fit. And I think most Canadians would agree with that also. It doesn't seem to be in Canada currently the case that somebody is, questioning that principle. So that's why it's not on the same level of urgency. But if you ask people the question, I'm pretty sure you'd get the same results.
When we look, Bill, at the leaders of these movements, the farm groups that were at the forefront, what are some things they had in common that we could potentially look at here in North America as effective measures? Media training, like you said, you alluded to charismatic spokespeople, the important role of some of those things that they had in common. Yeah,
so what I think the understanding, and this is not true for every country necessarily, but the understanding was in general like there needs to be an upholding of a public image. So if there are people who show up who are part of a specific political movement that is viewed negatively, try and have those protest signs removed. Uphold a level of decency in the way you protest. Don't hurt anyone. Don't get into a fight. Don't disrupt police work. They're just doing their job also. There was a general understanding and an intuition to do things properly and protest disruptively, yes, but with the intention in mind that we are here to change this one specific issue. And that was very successful. So the protest that experimented with like a general grievances and just be like, we don't like you as a political class, that doesn't go anywhere. Those ones that said, we don't want this specific diesel tax increase, you're making a specific ask. The voters and the viewers can understand what you want, and they go, yeah, that doesn't make sense. Why is the government implementing taxes on people that are already struggling to make ends meet? It makes no sense to me. And then then it's really difficult for the finance minister to go, well, I know there's 35,000 tractors out in Berlin, but I still think we need to plug the hole of the deficit in the budget with the money of farmers. That's a very tough ask. So I think being pinpointed, being decent to fellow citizens, not disrupting their lives more than they already are by virtue of you having a protest, is a very effective way. But I also want to say that you can't necessarily replicate this in every country. Canada and other European countries have a different culture of what it represents to protest. There's different associations with it, and that has an impact as well. It's like, I'm not saying you can necessarily replicate all of this exactly with the same successes. There are local contexts. What does ring true everywhere is that the more you gather the attention, the more the political establishment will need to pay attention to you, because if you're in the public eye, that's what politics cares about. They care about polling, they care about what people think.
Mm-hmm. And again, we have some examples in Canada, again, maybe not to the same extent as in Europe. You look at Quebec and the supply management, the dairy lobby in Quebec has a fair bit of sway, and there's probably lessons to be learned there. I think in general, though, Bill, farm groups, wherever you are in the world, are looking to influence and be part of the public discourse when it comes to policies that shape agriculture, and so that's where we have that in common. And so things that lead to effective lobbying or effective influencing of government policy, that's something that every farmer and farm group is looking to have that influence.
Absolutely, and it is incumbent on farmers who think that this is an important issue to look into who represents them currently. What is your local association up to? What are their priorities? How are they engaging with the local government, the provincial government, the federal government? What is the work they're doing? Sometimes they publish reports. If they haven't published a report, ask for one. What is the activities that you're engaging with? How are you informing me? I think that's an important part of the democratic process. You run your business. You don't want to necessarily be involved in every political aspect of it. You listen to the news, but it doesn't mean you want to be involved. But even if you don't want to be involved personally, it's good to check in on your local association and see that the work that they're doing. And if they're not doing good work, maybe there should be another one, right? So it's just it is important to stay part of the conversation so that when new rules come out, you're the first one to know in a way that is explained to you by someone who also works in your profession and not by, a government flyer that tells you just all the rosy details of what is going to happen. You need someone from your profession that understands your priorities to do that work for you.
Okay. Do you think there could have been ways of preventing what happened in Europe with the protests and tractors in the street and farmers needing to take those extreme measures? Could that have been prevented if there had been earlier engagement?
Well, I mean, it could have been prevented if Greta Thunberg wasn't so popular in 2019. You know, back then you took a selfie with her and you got yourself elected. That has kind of switched. So there was a general trend towards environmentalism at all costs. I think now we're going to more towards like environmentalism through efficiency. I think that's a good progress. It could have also been prevented. So it's hard to say because I mean, like there were representatives talking about those issues, but it's a very niche group of people. We wouldn't have backtracked all of Farm to Fork if it hadn't been for the protests. And the protest wouldn't have happened if it hadn't dawned on the average farmer how bad this is going to be. So I don't think there's necessarily a scenario where this could have been stopped earlier. It could have been, you know, if the pandemic hadn't happened, I think there would have been more engagement earlier. People would have been able to meet and discuss these things at conferences properly. I think more attention would have been grasped towards how important this issue is, and it wouldn't have happened so last minute. But yeah, tough to say ultimately. Yeah, I mean, a lot of analysts need to do their job properly. I remember when Farm to Fork came out, I was talking to people, some representatives of farm organizations, but also like big chemicals companies, these kind of groups, and they were like, oh yeah, we want to make Farm to Fork happen. Like sustainability is important. I'm like, this is a terrible idea. And I'm like, did you read the USDA impact assessment they published? This is like the worst idea ever. And they're like, oh, Bill, you're being so radical. It's like, we can't just brush everything off the table. We gotta, you know, find compromise. I'm like, the compromise, I don't know what the compromise is here. This is like a terrible piece of legislation. Well, turns out I was right. But you know, sometimes you don't want to be the person from the start that says no to everything, and I get that. But yeah, there were definitely signs. There's not enough people paying attention.
Final question then, Bill, and this might be putting you on the spot as it's looking to the future, but right now we have President Trump and the new U.S. administration. The pendulum, if 5 years ago Greta Thunberg was helping elect politicians, the pendulum has swung to the other side of in many ways. Mm-hmm. Do you see the pendulum continuing to stay on that side in terms of the direction of Europe, or do you see backlash from Europe, especially if there is a trade war or things like that in Europe, in terms of the political direction countering the Trump effect, or does it continue with that trend in the future? I know I'm putting you on the spot, just not saying you need to give a definitive answer, but your thoughts on where we're headed. Yeah,
I think it's definitely concerning that the global consensus on international trade is being undermined. Yeah. You know, Trump this is his last term, and he does have a tendency of thinking about this in a very limited way. So I hope there's no lasting damage beyond him in that sense. But the problem is that, you know, in Europe we do protectionist policies and tariff policies. We just package it in a different way. We're not as crude about it and as direct about these things as Donald Trump is, but ultimately we're saying the same thing. You know, we don't want the Canadian beef on our plate because we have our own beef and our beef is better. But we will say something like, you know, Donald Trump will go out and say like, well, we got to get that beef from other countries, only American beef. And we will say something like, well, the sustainability goals of European policy should be protect the rights of consumers to consume as local as possible without the infringement of unloyal trade practices from partners. Most people have no idea what that really means, but ultimately it means we don't want competition. So that sentiment exists across the board. And I think we're going to go further in that direction. You know, there's positive signs out of Asia. You know, in Asia, countries realize the importance of trade. But I think in Europe and North America, we're unfortunately walking back, and Trump is a symptom of the misunderstanding of the importance of free trade rather than the cause.
Well, appreciate your insights, Bill. We could talk about these topics for a long time, but thank you for your time, and enjoy the rest of your stay here in Manitoba. I know you're enjoying the dry air and nice temperatures here that we have for you.
It is very cold.